Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with another Python Django tutorial for you. This time we're going to cover the subject of Haystack and Whoosh, two modules that are used in the Django framework to provide search services. Now previously we covered doing an Ajax search module, and we did quite well with that, but if you're wanting a more robust system to actually do searches across all the text on your site, then the Whoosh and Haystack vastly simplify the whole task of doing that. And we've also had a few special requests from some of the guys who watch these videos and asked specifically to have a look at that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cover that because I think it's something that everyone can benefit from. So here goes. So the first thing that we need to do is basically install the modules, and as always we use pip, or you can use easy install depending on which you find easiest to use. So we're basically going to go pip install Whoosh and Django Haystack, and that should be enough to get you going. As you can see, I've already actually installed that, so I'm not getting any messages saying downloading or anything like that, but you should see a similar kind of thing once you've finished. Once that's installed, that's our modules actually built into the virtual environment, so that's the first step over and done with. The next step is to actually include it in our settings. So in our installed apps section, we want to install both modules, so Whoosh and Haystack, and that'll be enough to get that actually picked up by the system. Now the reason why we do that is because if we go to the command line, we run manage.py, you'll see now that inside of all the commands that we normally have, along with our Django and auth and our south and static files, we now have a Haystack section, which gives us extra commands to actually use Haystack to index through all the articles on our site from the command line. So if you've got a site that's on a remote server and you want it to kind of do an update, or you want to be able to run a cron job so that you can gradually update articles in the search indexes, then these commands here are going to be very useful to you. Rebuild index is what you use when you first start your site, so it'll go and create a massive big index from scratch. If you run that more than twice, it'll kill the previous indexes that it built. But if you do that for the first time and then use update index, then that should not kill the index that you've already built. So this is the one we're going to run first of all, and then in other times when you're trying to just update for new articles that have been created on your site or whatever, then you'll use the update index one. So that's the two main commands that I want you to remember. The others are useful. That's only used, the build Solr schema or Solr schema is only useful if you're using the Solr backend, where we're using Whoosh, so that's not relevant to us. But with a little bit of configuration, we could quite easily switch over to that. It's not a massive big deal to do so, but it's outside of the scope of this tutorial. We're just going to stick to Whoosh today. So going back to our settings, we've installed the apps, and then the next thing we need to do is we need to actually include a few pieces more of information. The first thing we're going to say is the Whoosh index is going to be located inside of our project directory called Whoosh. So inside of Django test we have a Whoosh folder, and we're going to say create the Whoosh index files, which is what you're looking at right here, inside of that folder. So we'll point to that inside of our settings.py file and say it's there. The next bit is to configure Haystack, and this basically says that the main connection that we've got is our default one, and it uses the engine Haystack backends whoosh underscore backend dot whoosh engine, and that just basically hooks us up to the Whoosh module so that we can then use that as our search backend. And the path to that is what we just created here. So it's inside of that whoosh folder, which is inside of our project. So that's that created and set up. So that's all our settings needed. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a search index. Now a search index is very much just like a class that we use to describe how the information can be pulled from our models and kept inside of the indexes that we're going to create in the whoosh folder. Now we have our normal model for articles, and we've got a title and a body, and we've got published date and likes and thumbnails, and the only ones that I'm really interested in are the title and the body. So inside of our articles app folder, we want to create a search indexes.py file, and inside of there we're going to put the definition for the class that will describe how the search index is created for Haystack. So inside our search indexes file, we're going to import time and date. I'm not sure I'm going to use time and date in this tutorial, but it's worth it having it in there just in case. Then we're going to import from Haystack indexes, and we're also going to import our articles model, or article model rather, because we're going to use that in our index class definition to describe how information is pulled out and what should be done, and from what fields we're going to pull things as well. So the first thing we need to do is define the class, and we're going to say article index, and it's going to derive from a search index, and it can be indexable. And this basically means that we can then go through and create indexes, but we can also use it as a search index as well. The first two fields are text, and this is a char field, and this basically gives us the setting of document equals true, and that means that this is going to be the main bulk of information that's going to get indexed. You can index other things like the published date, like I've shown here. However, the main thrust of what it's trying to store inside the index, which can be searchable, is basically this field here, and we've told it by document equals true that that's what it is. Then we're saying use template equals true. Now what that means is that we can then create a template of fields that we want to include inside of this main bulk of index information. So the template we're going to create is going to be very simple, but you can configure it a million different ways if you want to. But what we do first of all is we need to create that template. Now the template is created inside our main sites template folder. So Django test templates, we create a search folder, and inside of there we create an indexes folder, and then for that we create a folder named after the app that we're trying to create a search index for, and then in our case it's article, so it's our article app. Inside of there I've created an article underscore text.txt file, and this is going to contain a very brief bit of code that defines what our template is going to be. And inside of there we're just going to put two lines: object.title and object.body. So whenever it rolls through our models, it'll look at the specific object that's been pulled out of the database for the articles, because it'll more or less do the article.objects.all command that we saw in previous database related tutorials, where you pull all of the articles out. It will do that, and for each object in that list it will say give me the title, and give me the body. So we're basically saying get all of these article model class instances, roll through them and strip out the text in the body into our indexes, and that's in the end all churned up into that variable text. Now we won't necessarily need to do anything with that variable text, it's just basically somewhere to put it, but in the process of building the index, when we do the command line commands later with manage.py, it will use that variable as part of its way of creating these index files that we've created in the whoosh folder. So there's a few more things that we need to add to our index. The third thing that we need to add is content underscore auto, which is basically the content for our autocomplete that we used in the search pages on our Django site. So in our autocomplete here, where we were building this list, if you remember way back when we did that tutorial, we built a list with links through, and the autocomplete worked off this box here, which sent an AJAX callback using jQuery and then pulled the information back from the handler and then placed it into here. So we're basically saying we need to build an autocomplete field specially built for autocomplete purposes that will relate to our articles. To do that, we use a special field called an edge engram field. Now, edge engram fields, it's kind of like, if you think of it as scanning through each word, paying attention to spaces and white space in the strings, and trying to discern whether one word is a single word or a couple of words mashed together, and all sorts of kind of scanning processes. And this field will automatically do that, but it would also do it in a more optimized way. So we want to use an edge engram field for this particular type of search. The other kinds of searches that you might use, where you have a search page, bit like Google search, where you just type in a search on there and then you flip over to a new page where there's a list of stuff, you're probably not going to use an engram. You're probably just going to stick to the normal searches. And there's a very simple tutorial on Haystack's website on how to do a bog standard search page, but we're doing this AJAX feature, so everything's a little bit different, and that's why we're using this engram field, so that we can do the autocomplete stuff simply and easily. So in our engram field model attribute, we're saying which attribute of the model should we pay attention to for the searches, and in this case I'm saying title. You could probably do another one if you wanted to actually index through the body of the articles as well. You could probably stick another line in and have another engram that said model attribute equals body as well, and I'll show you later how we do it. We actually pass the information through to the index to get it to do the search, but we're just basically going to finish off doing this index definition. So the first, not the first thing, I keep on saying the first and I don't know why. The next thing we're going to do is just basically create a function that just says get model. It's a nice way of abstracting things, so that we're not necessarily saying that in this case it's not hard coded in that it's an article model that we're going to pass through. So if we get stuck, we don't have to necessarily go and change loads of lines of code. We can replace this with a temporary model that we want to use as an alternative, or we're just not making it set in stone. The next thing is we have an index underscore query set. Now this function is used when we're building our index from the command line, so we need to get this to return as many results as possible. So we're going to use self.getModel, so call this function, which really calls article, and we're going to say objects.all, so that will return everything from the articles tables that is recorded in there. And that's that. The next thing, just put a little note in there just so you remember. The next thing we need to do, now that we've defined this index, is we need to actually set up to use this. So how do we actually do that? Well, there's a number of things. The first thing we've got to do is we need to add in the Haystack URLs into our config. Now that's very simply done. All we need to do is add in a line just here that says, just add in URL again, oops, went too far. So everything that begins with search include Haystack URLs, and that will then allow us to do things like the dedicated search page that you could do in a similar fashion to something like Google search. It'll also help us with the routing side of things when we're doing our own particular setup. Now, I've just stopped to take a quick check to make sure that I've done everything else right. So we've got our template set up for the actual search index. We know the model's correct, we know we've got the correct fields and everything's set up in there, right? Okay, I'm confident we can now move on to setting up our index, our search view. Now, if you remember rightly, in the search, this Ajax search box actually calls a URL through our system, and it calls and eventually ends up at this view here, search_titles. And then we used to do a check to see if it was being sent anything through the post method, and then we used to get the search text out of there, and if there wasn't being sent a post, then we would just basically create search text as nothing and then do article objects filter. So we used to do we used to use the database to actually do the searches, which is fine, but it's not perfect, and it certainly doesn't perform as well as a full text search. So we need to replace some of this code with what we'd expect to see inside of our Haystack system. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import something, and what we're going to do is we're going to import haystack.query, or from haystack.query import search query set, and this class will allow us to do searches within our views in the way that we need to. Now just scroll that to the right so we can see it. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to then replace this lot of code here, and we're going to replace it with one line. The one line basically says create a search query set using the autocomplete method from that instance of search query set, and set the content auto argument to what's inside of the post array or the post list. And we're using this get method, which basically is a way of saying get this. It's like indexing into the array, but it has the option to put a default value, and our default value is nothing. It's an empty string just there. So we're basically saying try to get search text, and if you can't find it, just return something, an empty string. So we're kind of getting rid of all of that checking that we had previously before. So we got rid of all of this method, blah blah blah, get the search text out of the post. We've replaced it with this one line. So we've vastly simplified the code, and that should be enough to then return a set of objects. Now, if I just go back to the old code, in this case these would be a load of this would be a list of articles or article objects. Not so in the case of our new way of doing it. In our new way of doing it, we're actually creating some Haystack objects. So basically class instances that are generated by Haystack which don't resemble our article objects. So when we're actually doing our Ajax search, we need to slightly readjust the code in the view, or sorry, in the template, so that it reflects that. And the adjustments that we have to make are slightly different to what we've already got, because we've already built a URL using the article.id and then used article title.title to build that link that turns up on the page, like so. However, the changes we have to make aren't really very severe, because it's a slightly different object, so it has a slightly different hierarchy inside. So to change that, we change this one line here and we're changing it to these two things instead. So we're using article for article in articles, we want article object get absolute URL, which is something that we defined in a previous tutorial. You may remember that. That just basically is a short way of getting the actual correct URL through to the actual article itself. And instead of putting article title, we just basically insert the word object in between, because of the slightly different hierarchy inside of the return results from Haystack. We have to kind of do a little bit of a rejig of that, and that's enough to basically reset everything through to use Haystack instead of our own custom searches. So what's next? Well, the final section is just basically to get Haystack to build the index. Now, you should be able to just run manage.py, and as I said before, we want to do rebuild index, although we haven't actually built one and we're not really rebuilding one. Rebuild index does enough to just build one from the start, so that's the one we want. If we do that, it says, warning, this will irreparably remove everything from your search index in connection to default. Your choices after this are to restore from backups or rebuild via the rebuild index command. Are you sure you want to continue? Because basically what it's saying is, if you do this command, if there is an existing index, it will destroy it. So if there's anything in there from previous times what you want to keep, you should really be backing up right now before you run this command. And if there's nothing in there that you want to keep, fine, at least you've been warned, and if you lose it, there's no crying about it. So remove all documents from your index because you've said so. All documents removed, indexing 7 articles. And as we can see on our page, we've got 7 articles in the database, so that's a good count. That seems about right. Now, hopefully, if I haven't forgotten anything, which I don't think I have, we should now just be able to run server. And then if we go over to our site, do a quick refresh, everything's great, looking good. Test, and that brings up quite a few of the articles. And as you can see, as I hover over there, we can see it's created the links just fine. So all seems to have worked well. So that's the end of this tutorial, and I hope that you found this instructional or educational, or what instructional is, if it is a real word. I think I've just invented one. So if you did find this good, then please click the like button. And if you want to know more about the tutorials in the series and get a notification as soon as the new ones come out, then please click the subscribe button and we'll let you know as soon as the next one is available. Thanks for watching.